Tonight I'll be telling 3 stories. We are starting things off with a longer story about a creature I have personally never heard of before. This creature is known as a skinned. I won't delve into specifics as to not spoil anything in the story, but let's just say you guys are in for something a little bit different tonight. The second story is a fictional war story that'll definitely have you on the edge of your seat. And lastly, we'll be closing things off with a story from a security guard who ventures into a mansion with mysterious secrets to share. A huge thank you to the writers for allowing me to narrate their stories. Their links can be found in the description. Remember, you can send in your own story to rylhstories@gmail.com. Also, I wanted to say thank you guys for the ongoing support. It warms my heart to see the love this channel has been receiving. I have a lot of fun narrating these stories for all of you, so the fact that you enjoy them is a win-win for everybody. But I'll stop taking up your time so we can get into the stories. Please remember to drop a like if you enjoy, as it helps out the channel in a very real way. Subscribing if you're new is also very much appreciated. Enjoy the video, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. I have a story. Those 4 simple words came out of my older brother's mouth back at that very night of July 24th, 2009, over a decade ago. A night that has since haunted and left me curious of what was truly wandering in the woodlands of that little oak forest. I've spent hours every night for the past year, trying to find anything online that would at least give me something as simple as the name of that forest. But I've never found it. I stared up at him, looking at his pale round face, illuminated by the orange glow of the campfire separating the two of us. I glared for a split second, cleared my throat as I hadn't said anything to anyone for the past few hours, and spoke with a condescending but humoring tone to my voice. You're kidding. No, I wasn't a disbeliever in cryptids, ghouls, and any monster that lurked in the dark crevices of the earth, whether they were undiscovered beings and creatures, or something else entirely, but I obviously knew that whatever was going to come out of my brother's mouth was going to be a load of baloney. Allow me to describe what I mean. He's not a good liar, but always seemed to find it amusing no matter the situation. He'd tell my mother with a straight face that he didn't take one of my belongings, even though he was obviously hiding it behind his back. He'd tell my frustrated dad, who had just read his not-so-successful report card, that his C in algebra was a typo. In the end, my parents also had to sarcastically tell them that they believe him, and no matter what he did, never punish him for it. Even though my mom can see his arm folded behind his back, and my dad can most definitely tell that Mr. Harris would not make a typo on something as crucial as a school report card, but their inability to continue fighting with him became more and more distinct throughout the years, because one thing that was especially present to his lies was that he absolutely would never admit to them. One night back in 2003, my mom walked into his room and told him that he shouldn't be playing video games because he obviously didn't finish his homework, and that resulted in a full-blown tantrum by a little 9-year-old. He crossed his arms, did his notorious scowl, and stomped his feet until my mom threw her hands up and walked out in frustration, leaving him to resume playing on his PS2, and ignoring the fact that his science teacher, Mrs. White, would blow a vein in her forehead when she discovers his unfinished homework. And just a few years later, when he was 11 years old, he angrily refused to talk to my father about the detention he received that January afternoon. His PE teacher had caught him shoving down a girl in his class, and when he confronted him, he angrily screamed and spat in his face until he had to literally drag him out by the arm of the PE class. I remember his quote so vividly that night, to his constantly changing story that he was trying to keep explaining to my father. I didn't do it. Melissa pushed me first. Mr. Davis is the one lying, and he pushed me first. My attempts at relenting against him, telling him that a teacher wouldn't just push a student because they felt like it, were met with angry yells directed toward me, exclamations that I was the stupid liar. So yeah, if you couldn't tell, I'm not very fond of my brother. But I'm entirely off topic. Immediately my brother scowls in frustration. My sarcastic remark had already upset him, and I knew that if I didn't dial it back in a few seconds, my parents, sleeping inside the RV, would be immediately awakened and get on my case for making my brother upset. No, I'm serious. God, Michael. Can you not be an asshole for 2 seconds? My brother was a foul mouth. It started when he was 14 years old, and he pretty much cherished his vocabulary of swear words. Both of my parents were floored when the first time he casually dropped an F-bomb during dinner, and while my mom didn't care what he said, Unless it was an insult directed towards someone. My dad made it absolutely clear that he wanted absolutely no swears in his presence again, and if not, he'd make him mow our huge front lawn every week for the next month. Yet when I was the one who got caught, my dad would go ballistic and claim he'd trash every electronic in my room if he caught me swearing again. Whatever. Fine. I'll humor you, Josh. Tell me your story. Take it seriously. I thought it would be nice, seeing how we're near this campfire in the middle of a cool night. I rolled my eyes, just barely able to contain any more sarcastic remarks towards him. Alright, I will. Go ahead. I leaned back at the fallen log I was sitting on, vividly remembering how uncomfortable it was, but that it was better than sitting on the ground and having my mother get frustrated the next morning when she sees the stains of grass and dirt on the back of my pants. I vividly remember my brother look around, almost as if he was searching for something. He was most definitely eager to tell me his story, yet when I let him, he suddenly became completely unprepared. I swallowed the urge to chuckle, and a few seconds, he asked me a question I didn't anticipate. You know what a skinwalker is, right, Mikey? I hated it when he called me Mikey, because most of the time, he does it to annoy me. But did he just ask me what a skinwalker is? I mean, I recognized the name, and some details of what exactly one was, but I had no idea he even cared about mythological creatures. I immediately began to think, trying to remember details, and the only thing I could prominently remember was that they were mythical monsters that could disguise themselves as humans by wearing their flayed skin like a suit. Sure, yeah. No, you don't. He scoffs and crosses his arms. Now all we're missing is the repeated stomping and scarlet red coloration to his face, and we'll have a blown up episode. Fine, explain it to me. He begins to speak, taking in this obnoxiously ghoulish voice, doing those stereotypical ooh ghost noises. In as much detail he could remember, he informed me that skinwalkers are Navajo witches, or warlocks, capable of utilizing black magic to shapeshift into animals, either through possession or disguising by flaying the pelt off the animal and draping it over them, like some sort of demented suit of flesh and skin. And as I expected, that very method can be done to humans. I remember that he tells me a specific detail, that even after learning about mythological skinwalkers online, I don't seem to understand where he got it from. Maybe he either made it up, or got it from an odd source. I wanted to bring it up to see if others knew about it. And they say that the longer the witches and warlocks wear their striped coats to disguise themselves, they become more and more of the very being they're disguising as. The skin suits may eventually merge into their skin and become their new exterior one day, or gradually, bit by bit, they begin to sprout irreversible animalistic features: gray wolf fur, white eagle feathers, green snake scales. They start to hallucinate, lose memories, become focused, and eventually absolutely psychotic, and eventually revert to completely animalistic phase, losing all of their humanity for good. The skinwalkers become their own skin. All skinwalkers know that they must not wear skin suits, composed out of various different sources, as if they become their skin. He chuckles slightly. Quite the patchwork abomination might come out. They don't have a nickname for those types of transformed skinwalkers, probably because they're so horrific that they should never be named. I'm a bit brought back. For once in his life, what was coming out of his mouth was actually interesting to hear. Whether it was a lie or not, he seems to see my petrified state, mesmerized by his story, and slowly speaks again, asking me a question. Now, when a skinwalker steals one's skin, what happens to the body? It took me a few seconds to respond back, as I had to abruptly escape my trance. I had no idea. Maybe they ate it, maybe they disposed of it via burial. Maybe they dismember them and stick their severed limbs together to make makeshift meat scarecrows to traumatize the village the now deceased person was from. It took me a second, before eventually I had a pretty odd answer, but a pretty plausible one. They're witches, right? What if they turn them into mindless puppets, like minions or something like that? My brother's eyes widen for a split second, and he continues, You got it right on the money. Somewhat. I was stunned for a few seconds too. I didn't expect that to be the absolute right answer, so I was quite shocked that apparently my weird guess was right. Again, my brother continues. They call them the skinned, victims of skinwalkers. The whole process of becoming a skinned can't seem to work on animals, and it's believed it's because their brains aren't complex enough. But the process can't work on most humans. They become reanimated, like zombies, but not quite. From head to toe, their skin has been removed, usually in a complete crude fashion, exposing layers and layers of peeled back flesh, lacerated muscles, and exposed tendons. They may be severely injured in appearance, as death by skinwalker is no clean one, so claw marks and tears could be dug into their flesh, leaving open scars that never heal. The lower half of their skulls has been peeled open, exposing the skull's jawbone and the permanently exposed teeth of the person. Some say the tongue is gouged out prior to the process, so that the skin can't call for help if it retains some humanity, while some say the eye sockets are stabbed, blinding the skinned so it can't see what it's become. Some say the skinned have twisted limbs, forcing them to walk on all fours along the forest floor, and some say the skinned are disemboweled, leaving empty abdominal cavities with no present organs. People don't know why they do this, but most believe it's simply the result of inflicted wounds prior to death, and punctured holes through the side of the chest, through the heat, may symbolize that the skinwalker is a past lover of the victim, who had their heart broken and thus seeks revenge by stabbing straight through their own, right before death. I got very curious, so I decided to shoot him a simple question. Why do the witches make the skinned? What's the point of having minions if they're all damaged, reanimated corpses? Again, you're somewhat right. I glared at him confused. The skinned aren't not brought to life by the skinwalker themselves. When they obtain their skin suits, they usually abandon them to allow the elements to do the rest, break down their exposed bodies, and turn them into mulch to be absorbed into the earth over the course of several years. But through some supernatural influence, perhaps a failed attempt at revival through another outer force, the corpse becomes a skinned. I stop glaring and ask another question. If they're not minions, what do they do? My brother chuckles again. I could see why, as he loved everything gruesome. He saw Freddy vs. Jason when it came out in theaters back in 2003, and had the time of his life. They look for their stolen skin. They roam the forest they were killed in for eternity, searching for whatever bastard witch or warlock left them a bleeding husk. The supernatural essence within them leaves them unable to rot and die. But over the years, their soul begins to crumple, and what little humanity was trapped in the near mindless being they have become fades away for good. The skinned are flayed of not just their bodies, but their humanity. I shivered pretty damn hard. This was crazy. The idea of having some mythical creature robbing you of your skin and turning you into an undying zombie, endlessly searching for your lost flesh as you mentally wither into nothing freaked me out. So much that my brother immediately noticed as he laughs and points toward me. Ha, you're scared. I can see you shaking. I didn't like being caught in a moment of fear, so I retaliated. No, I'm shivering because it's cold. That was a half lie. While the faint wind brushed against my back, the glowing heat in front of me mostly canceled it out. Obviously, my brother caught me in my bluff, pointing at the nearby campfire, which was gradually dying down by now. Oh yeah, I'm sure it's absolutely freezing, and dark too. If only there was something here that could provide us heat and light. Alright, fine. You did scare me. But the fire's dying down. Let's just go in the RV and get to bed. It's probably way too late, and Dad didn't want us to stay up late so we can wake up tomorrow. No way. We're just going to go back on the road tomorrow by noon. I want to spend as much time here as I can. We can just sleep in the RV during the day. Then, do you have any suggestions about what we can do? I can continue telling you the story. A friend of mine told me that he ran into a skinwalker a few years ago, wearing the skin suit of a dead wolf. I don't think he was noticing the gradually fading glow of the campfire, so I pointed it out to him. The fire's dying down. It's because nearly all of our fuel has been used up. Mikey, do me a solid and go get some twigs. Josh, you want me to go out into the dark, damp forest, alone and in the middle of the night to go get more fuel? What, you scared that a skinwalker will pop out and take your skin? Don't be a wimp. There's sticks everywhere. It's not like you have to walk miles to find some. Come on and hurry up before the fire's dead. No way. Rock, paper, scissors for it. And no 2 out of 3. If I win, you do it. My brother scoffs in frustration, mumbling fine, under his breath and stands up, approaching me. I vividly remember our little match of RPS. I was hoping that I didn't have to go, as I didn't feel like doing so, but my choice of scissors against his choice of rock proved otherwise. I win. Rock beats scissors. Now go. My brother quickly speaks and points over my shoulder. I grumbled in frustration but knew I couldn't protest, as it was my idea, so I turned around, kicked my feet, and took a couple slow steps. My brother's joking demand of, "If the fire's dead before you get back, the skinwalker might get you," got on my nerves, but motivated me to pick up the pace, as I wanted to be done with it as soon as possible. I think I was walking for a good few minutes. I don't remember what I was doing, but I think I just had my hands in my pockets, thinking about our little vacation trip. Back in early July, our parents thought our excessive days of just playing video games for 12 hours straight, then going to sleep, was corrupting our minds, and they wanted us to take a 5-day road trip to clear our minds. Both of them had entirely different views on video games. As well, my mom normally just didn't want us to be excessively having our eyes glued to a TV screen. My dad absolutely believed in the whole idea that video games cause violence, and banned graphic video games. Strictly limited video game time on the family computer, and told us games like GTA 3 were made by a bunch of lowlifes who want to brainwash kids and literally turn them into raving lunatics. Until we were 18, he wanted absolutely nothing excessively violent in our gaming consoles, or that if we're caught with it, we have to not only return the game from where we bought it, but humiliate ourselves by writing an apology letter to whoever it was bought from. And if that wasn't enough salt in the wound, very limited video games for the next month. After around 3 or so minutes, my train of thought came to a halt and I remembered what I was out here for. I took my hands out of my pockets and searched around, eventually finding piles of fallen wooden branches on the ground. Before I scooped up as much as I could with prominent handfuls, before turning around and starting to make my way back. Walking back, my train of thought kept going again, and I picked up where I left off. If it wasn't obvious, my father loves to utilize fear as a scaring mechanism into stopping us from doing things he doesn't like. Well, my mother absolutely hates it, and it sparked countless fights between them. Just before the trip, Dad got curious one night, found some lewd sites on the history of my brother's personal computer, and lost his shit. Mom tried to tell him he was just curious, but my brother just flat out called him out on a supposed bluff. Eventually, Mom shooed us out of the living room and fought with Dad in private for an hour straight, so much that it actually exhausted him. I heard very little details through the muffled shouts in the next room over, but I could tell Mom was sick of Dad's method of traumatizing us. But Dad thinks that Mom's giving us too much freedom, that we think we can just do whatever we want. So while they stated this whole road trip was to give us some fresh air, I think it was mainly because of the tension in between them. But they didn't want to flat out tell us. And then, I stopped. Nothing had caught my attention. My whole train of thought just stopped, like it derailed. It wasn't like I just abruptly snapped back out. It's as if it had just abruptly concluded and wrapped itself up. That's when it hit me, why I stopped. I looked around in confusion, searching through the shadowy trunks and branches of the old oak trees before me. I was frozen, and that's when I truly realized why I had stopped. I didn't recognize where I was. I remember that even while I was first thinking, I could recognize subtle details in my trail. A lonely, rotted tree stump, a crumpled up can of either beer or soda resting on a pile of leaves, and a few jagged patches of gravel I had walked over. I searched and searched, and searched for any of those details, but they were nowhere to be seen. No, it's not possible. I had turned around a full 180 degrees when I got those sticks. It's not like I just got lost out of nowhere. I searched. Everything was quiet. Too quiet. It was like a horror movie, building up to a sudden loud jump scare. A blaring scream to deafen me, in the face of a deceased, mutilated creature to lunge out of the darkness to maul me and take my skin. God damn it. I yelled out in frustration. If my father was just a few feet away, I would have gotten a raw slap to the back of my head for yelling God's name in vain. But he wasn't. I was dead lost, in the middle of a forest, alone while it was the middle of the night. I was immediately consumed with a chilling feeling, one stronger than the weak, ice-cold winds. It was my blood freezing and shivers running up and down my spine. It was fucking panic. "Joshua!" I yelled out. I knew wherever I was, he probably couldn't hear me. but I just wanted noise in the forest, besides my own gradually quickening exhales. I yelled again, frozen in place. "Joshua!" Nothing. No. I knew where I was just a few minutes ago. Never in my life had I felt so paranoid. I was absolutely shocked to my core. I could barely move my upper body, while everything below my pelvis was anchored to the ground. I vividly remember trying to lift my left foot, but it's as if I was wearing a steel-toe boot welded to the ground. I just stood there, for about a few minutes straight, just trapped in place as my breathing grew more and more hysterical. I couldn't move my legs, I couldn't hear anything, I couldn't even open my hands and drop the handfuls of twigs stuck to my palms. It was so surreal, and my own personification was the only thing keeping me from full-blown trembling to absolute shock. I felt lightheaded, as I was breathing like my life depended on it, and then, just then, I heard it. The first noise within the last 8 minutes or so, a noise that I can recall in so much detail, despite its immensely short length and abruptness. I didn't even know what it was at first, but it eventually came into my mind, and when I realized what it most likely was, I nearly vomited right then and there. It was the loud crunch of a twig snapping under someone's foot. "Joshua?" I screamed so loud my voice cracked, and for half a second, went high-pitched. At that very moment, I didn't care what it was, whether it be a wild animal or escaped, knife-wielding mental patient sneaking up on me. It's as if nothing in the world mattered to me at that very moment, a moment that only lasted just a few seconds, until I heard it again. Another twig snapping. I didn't know where it was coming from, but I absolutely knew that it was getting closer. Not like this. Anything but this. I remembered that glimmers of life seemed to flash before my eyes. Potential deaths in my mind. I get mauled to death by feral animals and semi-eaten. I get gutted to death by a maniacally laughing serial killer, and buried under a huge patch of gravel, or I never escape my petrified state and get discovered in the morning. Curled on the forest floor in the fetal position. Death from exposure. Would have preferred that last method. It was the least gruesome. I then heard it. What came next was at first entirely familiar, the third snap of a twig, but it was followed just milliseconds later by a sound that I can easily describe, but can't put together in words how bone-chilling it was. A slow, guttural groan. It was a person, or what I was hoping it was. From the best I can put together, it was like the final breath of a smoker succumbing to lung cancer, or the mangled, raspy exhale of someone's life being sucked out of them via strangulation. It was human, alright, yet not natural. It was the sound of absolute agony. No man can generate that sound at will. I heard it again. Got another listen to it. Much clearer than before. It was sickening, beyond disturbing. Though it felt different than before, and it took me a few seconds to understand why. The first sound was an exhale, and this one was an inhale. I'm praying by now. Praying that whatever is happening is just some fucked up prank by Josh, and stuff like the inability to locate those subtle details and his malformed gasps were just my mind twisting details from an excessive amount of fear. Maybe I had dozed off at the campfire, and whatever this was a nightmare. I would pinch myself if I could, but by now, my fingers were stuck together, and all I could do was wiggle the tips of my thumbs. I heard it again, a twig snapping, followed by a mangled inhale. I stayed silent for a couple seconds. There it was, a twig snapping, a grotesque exhale. It almost had a rhythm, and after a while, I seemed to recognize the spaces in between the combination of the breaking branch and warped exports or intake of breath was almost perfect every time, so much that I even counted it to be nearly exactly 6 seconds. I couldn't really tell if my fear had faded away by then. I was perplexed by these near inhuman sounds, and the only thing affecting me was my inability to move, and the faint winds that I had been in so long that my teeth were chattering. Abruptly, everything just ended. The unusual noises were gone, and now, I could at least hear the faint whooshing of the wind before me. I felt pins and needles in my hands and legs, so intense that they hurt, as if all the blood flow in them had stopped. I straightened my fingers, flexed my toes, and gradually lifted my left foot, finally taking my first step in what I think was at least 20 minutes. I think at that moment, I was convinced whatever just occurred was some sort of fear-induced psychotic episode. Those strange noises were auditory hallucinations my brain created, and finally, I managed to snap out of my episode, and the noises abruptly left. Though, upon a couple seconds after the ending of my presumed episode, I felt an unusual warmth in my face, so I opened my left hand, allowing me to drop the mass of sticks as they crashed to the ground, and rub my face in confusion, tears running down my eyes. I was involuntarily crying, but I now knew that it was just all part of the episode. I started to slowly walk again, but I was still recovering from what the hell had just happened. So while I wanted to run, until I knocked all the air in my lungs, I could only slowly drag my feet. I felt an overwhelming feeling of warmth wash over me. A sign that everything seemed to be okay now. How absolutely wrong I was. How dead wrong I was. Never in my life had I been that wrong before, and my body gave me an overwhelming feeling that it was all over. But all that really was the appetizer before the main course. What happens next has traumatized me to a massive degree, and for the next few weeks, I had recurring nightmares, where I'm forced to relive this moment every time. If I had a full bladder, I would have definitely emptied by then. What came next was not human. Nothing capable of living can generate this noise. Not even a demon straight out of hell could. In this horribly distorted, jarring voice, I can nowhere near replicate when telling this story to my friends and family. It uttered a single word I could not understand at first, but after this, I finally realized what it said. Skin. I don't know what scared me more, the abruptness and volume of it, or the fact that unlike the sounds of snapping twigs and raspy groans, I could understand where it was coming from. A few feet behind me. Then I heard it. The dragging, the crawling, the swishing of soil, the cracking of the branches I had dropped behind as it writhed over them. Like a giant leech. Before I could fully register its existence, I had gradually spun my head around and got a good look at what it was. It was what I wasn't hoping for. It was a twisted, mutilated human being, and if you couldn't tell from all that buildup, it was a skinwalker victim, flayed nearly to the skeleton with dissected layers of muscle, flesh, and other body parts exposed, formerly under the layers of skin that formerly protected its body. I remember the face. Gutted and punctured with the right side, looking like someone had taken a claw hammer to it. So much I could see sections of its skull. Its empty right eye socket and nasal cavity were crusted with a combination of what looked like dried blood and mucus, while the left eye had absolutely no color. It was dead. It was not alive. It shouldn't be alive. Its teeth, still pearly white as if it was alive, and almost glowing in the moonlight, were fully exposed from the lack of lips. Yet were no pair of dentures. They were gnarled, sickly, and stained with various colors of substances I didn't even want to get a better look at. I could now understand its malformed breathing, as its trachea was split wide open, exposing a gaping hole in the front of its neck. What I formerly thought was the sound of crawling was not crawling. That thing was walking on all fours. Its elbows pointed up to the sky, and while I couldn't see it at first, its knees were fucking twisted backwards. One thought was in my mind during the good 10 or so seconds I had my eyes set on this creature. Not the fact that I was literally looking at a real, genuine version of the creature my brother had told me just a half an hour prior, but the fact it was dragging its extremities along the ground and scuttling toward me. I heard it speak again, this time seeing its mouth move. I didn't understand how it could muster fully audible words with no lips on its face and visibly damaged muscles in its jaws, but it could. Skin. Thoughts flooded my mind, so rapidly that I could barely register them as soon as they popped up. What I was looking at was not a creature that should be alive. It was an abomination that freed inside from whatever rotted chamber it had been locked in years ago, and I needed to get away from it now. Before my body could reparalyze itself, I opened my grip, allowing me to drop my other handful of twigs. Before I turned around, took a random path in the direction I had been searching, and ran like my life depended on it. And when I took off, I think it did, because I heard the creature speak the only 3 words I could understand at that moment. Give it back. The end of its final word gradually began to warp, as it transformed into a ghoulish howl. By the time I had gotten around 10 or so yards from it, I heard its howl twist into what I could only describe as an ear-splitting shriek, one my brother would never have the lung capacity to do. I knew what I did. I pissed it off, and before I could start praying that it was slower than me, I remember what kind of being I was dealing with. I heard several twigs break per second, Somehow through its agonizing screech, it was chasing me. I didn't know how long I ran, but I ran until there was little air in my lungs and stomach bile in my throat. I narrowly threw up in my mouth, yet I kept running, because I could hear that thing in hot pursuit. And through an absolute miracle, I saw it. The silhouette of my parents' RV through the gnarled branches I was plowing through, blocking my face with my arm. Through the gaps in my fingers that was shielding my face, I can see glimmers of the smoke rising from the now extinguished campfire. The second I had escaped the trees and pretty much flung myself into the empty area where my parents had set up a campfire, I immediately emptied my stomach's contents. My vomit was hot and boiling from all the stress I had just inflicted on my body, and it scorched the inside of my throat. I glanced upward. My vision reduced from the tears and sweat in my eyes, but I could see the outline of my brother, standing just a few feet over me. "Michael, holy shit, where the hell have you been?" That's when I realized something. I had not just escaped. There was no finish line. That thing was still after me, and within seconds, I jumped up to my feet, my legs aching, and my entire body just overheated. Never in my life had I ran as much as that. Nowhere near, as more than any miles I've run in PE class. I could only muster out a couple words, before my voice was cancelled out by the petrifying scream of the creature. It had stopped screaming for a few seconds, just enough for my brother to not get a full listening of it, because it had lost me, but both an extremely exhausted me and my own brother were in its radius. I can remember what I said as clear as ever. "We need to get in the RV right now." My brother told me at a later date that when he heard the screech of whatever was in the forest, he had almost shit himself right there. Before I could even blink, he had his arms scooped under his armpits, and he had me dragged into the RV within a span of around 5 seconds. Did it so fast that I was shocked he didn't get a hernia, and to this day, this is the greatest thing he's ever done to me. If he had left me in a panic, I would not be online writing this story. That thing would have burst out of the shadows, wrap an outstretched hand around my ankle, and drag me into the darkness where we would never be seen again. The booming bang of my brother slamming the RV door and locking it immediately woke both of my parents. But before my father could self-detonate and chew him out for waking them up, their gazes immediately averted to me, who was left sweating, crying, a retching mess on the RV floor. I remember my mother immediately coming to my aid, horrified because, as she would tell me years later, she had never seen me in such a state of absolute disarray before. My father interrogated my brother, unsure of what to make of my current state, but believing my brother was behind it. My ears were ringing badly, but I could hear what he was telling him. "There's something in the woods. We heard it scream, and it didn't sound like a wild animal." My father showed immediate disbelief, but I remember through choking gasps of air, I assured him that I ran directly into it, and it chased me out of the woods. My parents were mortified upon realization that my brother wasn't lying again, and my father urgently asked what I had seen in the woods. I remember what I said, word for word. It was a person on all fours, with no skin. What came next was a blur. My own body was starting to power down from how much energy I had drained myself of, and even though I struggled to stay awake, just in seconds, I felt myself slip out of consciousness. All I remember is my brother frantically telling something to my parents, and my panicking mother scooped me up. I woke up an undetermined time later, and a couple years later, while reciting the story to my brother, he told me that I was out for around 11 hours straight, and I slept dead silent. I remember waking up in the back of the RV on my bed, my dad driving, my mom in the front seat, and my brother on his bed, laying down and playing his Nintendo DS. Everyone was silent, and my brain was flooded so much that it took me hours to remember the events of last night. My brother and I talked just an hour later. I asked him what the actual hell just happened, and he told me to not talk about it at all until we got home. I didn't particularly understand what he meant at first, and just a couple hours later, I discovered that our road trip had been cut a day short. However, it would be years until I would fully understand what truly happened after I lost consciousness. My mother said nothing, while my father always silenced me, telling me he never wanted to speak of it. My brother was the only one who would talk to me about it, but told me he didn't remember what happened after I passed out either, since he fell asleep as well and wanted to hear it from my father. But he always acted as if it never even seemed to happen. I had my nightmares. They plagued me so bad, but they eventually went away. Some were either me re-experiencing when I was paralyzed in the middle of the forest, listening to the sounds of snapping twigs and distorted groans, while some were me fleeing from that horrific creature that was chasing me, hysterically screaming. After about a few months, the whole thing escaped my mind. It wasn't until somehow, over a decade later, the whole experience reappeared in my mind during a conversation with my brother about past vacations, and that road trip popped up. I remember talking to him over lunch, and surprisingly, he found the whole thing so mysterious and odd. I asked him a few questions. Some I remember was how long I was gone, and he informed me that it was at least over half an hour, and he got extremely worried I had gotten lost. I told him that I did and described my whole episode, that I was just anchored to place, and heard those two noises over and over again. I asked him where he had gotten the whole information of the skinned, because I can't find anything like it online, and he told me the same friend who supposedly encountered a skinwalker told him. My brother thought they were made up at first, but wanted to amuse me with the story of them on that very night. I asked him why he apparently couldn't hear that thing screech for the first time. He told me that oddly, everything was dead silent, and it wasn't until I lurched free of the forest that he heard the thing's wail. That's when I remembered the most important question. A question I've been trying to think of an answer for years. Josh, when we got into the RV and I told Dad that it was some fucked up creature, what happened after I passed out? My brother froze for a few seconds, looking down at his plate and just chewing. He swallowed his food and finally spoke. Dad told me to lie to you before I woke up. He knew what happened. Mom and I both witnessed it, but they didn't want you to know any details. That whole experience messed you up good for at least a few weeks. You had night terrors, right? Yeah, I did. But what did you see? The rest of the night was silent after that. That thing probably wandered off or was never able to find us. So I remember we all kinda just fell asleep in our beds. Mom embraced you the whole time, and you were mumbling in your sleep. 4 words. They weren't coherent at first, and I guess only I heard them because Mom and Dad were both asleep by then. I don't have it. That thing yelled at me before it started running at me. The screech of its voice. Give it back. I think that's why. My brother picked at his teeth before continuing to talk. That's, not all. I remember waking up in the morning. Mom and Dad were outside the RV. Mom was horrified and crying. Dad couldn't look. So I came out and Mom tried to cover my eyes. But I saw it. Nearly right there. A sheriff just came a couple minutes later. If you're wondering, he was of no help. I stared at him with a combination of curiosity and fright. I felt an overwhelming chill run down my spine. The one that would never compare to the ones I had while I was stuck in the middle of the forest. What did you see? The sides of the RV, even the roof, were covered in reddish-brown splotches, visibly dried and encrusted into the RV's paint. My brother winced for a split second, but continued, staring me in the eyes. They had a shape I didn't recognize at first, but seconds before Mom covered my eyes, I could tell that they were handprints. While we slept, that bastard came back and crawled all over the RV. I finished his sentence, because it was looking for me. I don't know what truly lurks in the dark crevices of Earth, but I know now, not all of them are feral. Some used to be people like you and me, but they were robbed of everything they had. The very matter that covers their body, shields of meat from the outside world, the cold, empty outside world. It's driven me crazy. I remember thinking about how negative my brother was, bringing up all these awful things he's done in the past, how much I despised him prior, yet he saved my life. What if he was the one who went into the forest? What if he was the one who ran out of the forest, out of breath and vomiting? What if I abandoned him? What if he was the one who was dragged into the forest, gone without a trace? I would never, ever see him again. Not me, not our parents, not the friends or teachers or other supervisors he's had that have broken their backs over the years, trying to make him a nicer person. If the chances were different that night, one of us would not be present today. Maybe even both. Yet there's one thing that still unnerves me about this incident. It's that whatever truly that creature was, it's still out there in that dark, silent forest, condemned to walk in animate limbo, searching for not just its ripped away skin and flesh, but something else that was ripped out of it. Its soul. I'm currently recovering in a hospital in Guam, and with nothing better to do, I finally decided to tell someone about what happened to me a month ago. even if it is just anonymous people on the internet. In fact, that's imperative. Too much of our mission is secret for me to be able to tell people I know in real life. Instead, all I can say is that I'm a soldier with the good guys, and we recently forced the bad guys into one last stronghold. It was a small walled town that had previously been filled with displaced women and children. This meant we couldn't bomb the area to Kingdom Come, or even attempt surgical strikes with missile-laden drones. Too risky, the brass said. Instead, we encircled and besieged. There was no attempt at negotiation. Eventually, we knew they were low on ammunition when they stopped taking pot shots at us. We knew they were low on food when the kids started making desperate raids just to get to fields outside the walls. We grabbed everyone we could. For everything else we needed to know, we had a man on the inside. His codename was Arnold. He let us know when the bad guys had finally had enough. In response, we relented on just one corner, a gap that led to plains where we could safely bomb a retreating enemy. It wasn't long before Arnold crept outside himself and told us when the bad guys were planning their breakout. It was part of a group that laid in wait along the planned escape route. We just needed to herd them in between two hills. After that, there would be no escape from the waiting attack helicopters. It was a simple plan, but one that we had executed several times before. Arnold wouldn't go back. He was terrified that the others were on to him. The higher-ups let him stay to give final security updates to us on the front lines. He was a nervous, skinny man with wild unkempt hair and delivered by far the strangest briefing I had ever sat through. He told us about how there were 600 men still fighting fit inside those walls. He explained how every third man would actually have bullets in his rifle, but there was still a healthy supply of grenades and mortars among them. He even went over the names and looks of the lead bad guys, because he still thought we were interested in taking prisoners. But then, he started talking about the weird rituals and black magic their mystics and religious leaders employed. They were actually slaughtering potential food sources every night for a solution from above or below. This was to our benefit, because we would likely be fighting delusional and malnourished soldiers. Soon, it was time. As night fell, Arnold went beyond the hills in the direction of a waiting command unit. We hunkered down in our defensive positions, and watched as a small door opened and a solitary scout tentatively walked forward. When nothing happened to him, he signaled to the door, and a line of bedraggled men with a variety of small arms slowly followed. This wasn't exactly the floodgates we were expecting, so no action was taken at first. But when the men started to spread out, we needed to literally get them back in line before they noticed how screwed they actually were. We fired warning shots, and were rewarded by their increasing pace. Then the world exploded. At least, that's what it felt like. Earth showered over me as I heard my teammates scream through a seemingly never-ending thunder. We had been shelled with a near-direct hit. Our other groups were similarly hit with accuracy too good for just luck to be involved. I immediately scanned the nearby town for spotters, when a zipping sound caused an instinctive belly flop. Those cowards were taking advantage and storming our positions, while even more poured out the door. I wasn't sure where to aim, but luckily, I didn't need to think for myself. My commander appeared out of nowhere and instructed some of us to deal with approaching threat, and the rest to focus on digging foxholes. He grabbed me by the shoulders and pulled me behind a large rock. Another mortar shell hit. Thankfully, just pelting us with more dirt and rocks, but still way too close for comfort. The commander shoved a sniper rifle into my hands as he roared above the noise. "I heard you're the best shot in our unit." And then he just pointed me towards the town. I followed his gaze and saw a large church tower, the highest building around, with a dark shape filling the window to the bell chamber. I quickly raised the rifle to my chest and looked through the scope for just a split second before firing. That's all the time I needed. The dark shape fell away, and the commander slapped me on the back in approval. To my horror, a new shape appeared in seconds, on the flat roof of the same tower. This time, the shape was only half the size of the first. I lowered my rifle. The commander leaned into my ear and said, "Every enemy you kill will mean life saved, son. Do not stop firing." I started to protest, but he continued, "For God's sakes, man, that's not a kid. Didn't Arnold tell you they've got a dwarf on their side?" I nodded even though I didn't remember Arnold saying anything of the sort, but I was desperate for the lie to be true, while the commander nudged my rifle back toward the town. I looked through the scope. The shape was blurry, but could have been anyone at this distance. I even convinced myself some of that blur was a beard. So I fired. The shape fell down. I didn't know what to think when the next shape to take his place was even smaller. I froze for what seemed like minutes. The commander yelled at me, then he hit me, but I only responded by dropping my rifle. The small shape, far away, raised its tiny arms and pointed at us while the earth exploded around us again, and again, and again. The commander disappeared, but only for a moment. Somehow he had Arnold with him. Our mole was clearly freaked out to be here, but he knew what needed to be done. He whispered into my ear, but I heard every word clearly. He told me about how he had lied during our briefing. Animals weren't being sacrificed. It had always been the kids of the town. They had been killed one by one to summon demons in their place. He assured me that I was looking at a demon right now. I grabbed the rifle and slowly raised it once more. As Arnold described the horrific rituals, I looked at the dark shape through the scope and witnessed the blurry thing on the other end growing. The body wasn't getting bigger. Instead, legs like a spider grew out of the thing's back and lifted it off the ground. I shot high, trying to hit center mass, but the thing ducked low. So, I fired again, and my aim was true. The whole quivering, shrieking mass fell off the tower. Actually, I wasn't sure if I could hear its inhuman shrieks from here, or if I was hearing the shrieks of our own sides injured. Either way, I could hear something, because the mortar rounds had slowed. I was making a difference. But another small shape appeared. This time I clearly saw glowing red eyes, and tentacles where hands should have been. I quickly fired again, and again when another shape took its place, and again, and again. There was no hesitation anymore. Once I had stopped thinking and just accepted my situation, everything got easier. I stopped feeling too. I might have stopped breathing. At least some part of me definitely stopped existing. I found myself wishing the next mortar shell would fall on me, but I kept their spotters from finding us, until that miraculous moment that nothing else appeared on top of the tower. The rest of our forces killed, or pushed back into the town. The insurgents. We had peace and quiet for a good hour. During that time, we regrouped, resupplied, and positioned ourselves for the final push. Almost on cue, the remaining enemy poured out of the town with surprising, frightening speed. To my horror, each and every one of them was monstrous like the shapes I'd been witnessing from afar, but now they were much closer, much clearer, and getting bigger with every leap toward my direction. It was me they were after. I was sure of it. The other groups were ignored, and the massive tentacles, insect legs, and long needle-like teeth only pursued the hill I was hiding behind. Although, there might have been another explanation. Arnold screamed about how they were after him, how they knew he had been the one to squeal about them. Either way, he was terrified, but there was nowhere to run to. The nightmare before us moved far faster than any man ought to. Our only salvation lay in our superior firepower, so we opened up. At this distance, I saw what had only been hinted at from afar. Bullets ripping apart heads, tearing through limbs, making rib cages explode with gore. By the time that demonic horde was on top of us, it was a third its starting size, but it did get on top of us. Our long guns were dropping for the flexibility of sidearms and hand-to-hand combat. However, all my group could do was hold them off long enough for our allies to surround and finish. While we waited, I was stabbed again and again by the sharp ends of snake-like arms and bitten several times by little mouths that resembled a piranha's. Several of my men fell to worse. Eventually, I lost my balance and fell when a squid-like abomination launched itself into my chest. I jammed my combat knife into its head and was rewarded with the inky black substance spraying all over me. But I was alive. Mostly. Too exhausted to get back up and wounded a dozen times, the only thing I could manage to do was pass out. They say when I was found, my finger was inside a grenade pin. One barely attached to a grenade on my waist. All I know is from when I regained consciousness, while I started rising into the air. I had been strapped to a gurney hanging from a helicopter, and flown to a nearby base for immediate medical treatment. Before I lost consciousness again, I looked down at my now dark red uniform. A knife was still there, having been plunged into my stomach, and bandaged in place so as to not farther damage anything. I had no idea when that had gotten there, but I just closed my eyes and didn't open them again for the rest of the flight. I was bounced around multiple hospitals until I finally ended up here. A nice quiet hospital in Guam that was equipped to deal with my injuries and rehab. I'm not the only one in my unit to survive. Far from it, in fact. I was one of the worst wounded, but one of those killed was Arnold. He had fallen to that horrific horde and was buried with them in a mass grave. Everything about our mission was classified to the highest level. I still lay awake at night, thinking of those small blurry shapes. When the helicopter was lifting me out of that mass of bodies, I had almost turned my head to see the carnage I had wrought, to see what those monsters looked like in the light of day. But I couldn't in the end. I was too scared of what I'd see. I'm a mobile patrol security guard, which basically means I drive all around the city checking doors and responding to alarms for businesses that can't afford full-time guards. I work graveyard shifts, so you can probably imagine the weird stuff I see on a nightly basis, but nothing tops what I just saw. Tonight started off like normal. I got into the office, picked up my patrol gear, filled out my reports, and had a cigarette with my coworker, Cody, who's on another route. I'm not a smoker, but it being Saturday night, I felt I had to prepare for the fuckery I would probably have to deal with. We maintained our routine conversation, which includes bitching about our boss, our time in the army, school, or whatever crazy situation we found ourselves in the night before. I spend my 12-hour shifts alone for the most part, so I always try to meet up with him when I can. He told me he had been getting a much higher volume of alarms and open doors on the routes I was running tonight. Didn't surprise me. Winter had just started, which means more homeless people were breaking in to get out of the cold rain and snow. It was clear tonight, so I wasn't worried. But still, I readied myself for alarms galore. I put out my cigarette, got into the car, and started my route. I called my wife to chat for the first hour of my drive. All my hits at the beginning are 30 minutes apart, so it's pretty quiet. She didn't answer. I figured she had work in the morning and I forgot. I have a really bad habit of forgetting her schedule, and she tends to get angry about it. I knew that meant I'd get an earful from her if I called again. I rode in silence. I had an overwhelming feeling of dread, as if I had forgotten something, but after pulling over and checking my gear, I realized I had everything. Still, that feeling made me uneasy. I didn't just feel off, I felt like something was wrong. I have a tennis club I have to lock up at midnight, but the time was 2 a.m. It had proven to be a busy night after all. 3 alarms, and a close call with some angry tweakers made me late. It wasn't a big deal though. The club was closed during winter, so the gate was probably already locked. I was frustrated I wasn't going to be able to get my usual order of chili fries from Del Taco, because the cops that responded to the crackhead situation took their sweet time. I arrived to the club, and got out of my car and was creeped out by the absolute silence of the club. It was in a really nice area outside of the city, so homeless and gangs hadn't touched it yet. Still, the silence always gives me the chills. Before I could turn around from my car, the silence was broken by a loud creak. I froze. I grabbed for my baton and quickly turned around. The gate had been blown open by the wind. I chuckled to myself. I almost lost my shit over a gate. Then I realized that the gate was locked last night, and no one should have unlocked it. My fight or flight activated. Thinking someone could be in there, I drew my baton and my flashlight. After searching the courts and seeing the lights in the building out, with no windows broken, I concluded that I was overreacting. There must have been a cleaner that came in today. I called my supervisor and explained the situation. He seemed creeped out. Then he said something that gave me goosebumps. The cleaners come in on Wednesdays. He told me that he'd pull the security tapes in the morning, but nobody had entered the property since I did, according to the gate sensors. I hung up. I nervously left it off, and quelled my anxiety by coming up with a situation that the owner must have come through earlier, and turned off the gate sensor. I wrote an incident report, and moved on to the mansion to check all the doors. After pulling on all the doors, I got to the last one and my heart stopped when the door swung open. The adrenaline kicked in again. In my 3 years of patrolling this property, I had never come across an open door. This place was owned by the kind of rich people that would never leave themselves open to theft. There were too many valuables in there. My baton was out again. My mind was going a mile a minute. If some burglars had broken in, they were serious. I called my supervisor again. He assured me it wasn't possible. The alarm hadn't gone off, and the motion detectors had picked nothing up since Wednesday. I was just confused at this point. I was told I needed to sweep the property since there were no signs of forced entry. Reluctantly, I ventured in. The first thing that hit me the second I stepped foot in was the alarm. I set it off. I started feeling nauseous from my anxiety. Alarms tend to be incredibly unsettling, so whoever is breaking in will be less inclined to stay long. Still, it was one of the creepiest I've ever heard. 2 screeching beeps followed by, "You are trespassing. Exit the property now, or never leave this house." The warning was repeated 3 times. I thought it was an odd threat. What did they mean by, "never leave"? I swept the living room. Everything looked untouched. There was a painting of an old homeless-looking man that I could have sworn was staring at me. I was so uneasy I was ready to start sweeping rooms with my Glock in military style, just to feel a little bit of control over this mansion. Obviously I didn't. I'm not a SWAT officer looking for FBI's most wanted. I moved on to the kitchen, and was instantly hit with a horrifying smell. My senses were overloaded by the overwhelming darkness not lit by my flashlight, the deafening alarm, and the stomach-turning smell. I started to get a headache. The floor was a mixture of a wet and sticky. I was reassured that a cleaner must have come through and used some mixture on the floor recently, but my reassurance was thrown out the window when I hovered my flashlight over to the counter. Rotten food covered it. Mystery meats covered in maggots and flies. Black, unidentifiable fruits, and rats feasting on the buffet. I had to stop myself from hurling onto the floor. I had seen enough of that godforsaken kitchen. I slowly backed in the common area, not moving my flashlight an inch from disbelief that what I was seeing was reality. I put my back up against the pillars and dry heaved for a minute. Looking back, I guess I'm glad I didn't make it to Del Taco for those chili cheese fries. Suddenly the blaring alarm stopped. The silence was more deafening than the alarm itself. I couldn't process what I had stumbled upon. Never in my life had I been so scared. I wanted to kick down the nearest door and collapse into tears. It is too late. I nearly jumped out of my clothes. That alarm was really starting to get on my nerves. Good. I hope the police come to this hell house. I yelled in frustration at the alarm. They are not coming. This was louder than the previous voiceover. It took me a second to realize that this inanimate pre-recorded alarm just replied to me. Is this some kind of joke? I angrily shouted. Where are you? I'm not the type to mess with like this. My voice was weak and shaky. I felt helpless. I had pulled out my weapon and it shook uncontrollably in my hands. I wanted so badly for someone, anyone to jump out and rush me, just so I didn't have to feel this suspense anymore. Nothing. The alarm didn't reply. 5 minutes passed. It felt like an eternity, but I stood like a statue. A shaking, crying statue. The silence was broken by my phone's ringtone. JoJo's Bizarre Adventure OP2. I dropped my weapon out of shock. I was livid that I had chosen that ringtone. It was my supervisor. I answered. Are you done yet? No. Hurry up and check upstairs. His voice changed when he said that. I was speechless. I grunted and hung up before he could respond. I turned to my left and there was a staircase going up and another going down. I still had the basement and second floor to go. Screw that, I thought. As I mentally prepared myself to head up, I heard footsteps above me. That was enough for me. I didn't care. I sprinted out of that house faster than I've ever run before. I left the door open, the gate open, and hopped in the car. I locked the doors and turned the ignition. I was so paranoid I checked the back seat. My gear was all that was back there. I pulled out of the driveway, and then I did something I wish I hadn't. I looked back at the house. To my horror, in the second-story window I saw it. A figure. His eyes were the only feature I could make out. They were yellow. They cut right through me. The figure raised his arm to reveal the silhouette of a knife. He waved at me. Then he smiled wider than any human ever could. His teeth were more yellow than I knew possible. In a panic, I reversed out of the driveway and continued in reverse down the street until I got to the main road. Without a destination in mind, I drove. I'm sitting in a 7-Eleven parking lot right now writing this. I don't know what to do. I texted my supervisor that I swept the house and I'm writing the report, but I don't know what to say. I can't send the cops. I don't know why, but I just can't. I believe that what I saw was pure evil, because I have no rational explanation for it. Honestly, I don't want an explanation. My wife won't answer her phone. My coworker won't answer his phone. My supervisor won't answer his phone. And I'm pretty sure the 7-Eleven guy is staring at me because he thinks I'm on drugs. He won't stop staring. I think I have to quit, but I need this job. My wife and I just bought a house, so I can't afford to be jobless right now. But I can't go back there. I just can't.